And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today, the 19th day of January. And of course, sorry for the little bit of a late start. We're still trying to work our way around the new technology here until we sort out the software. Well, right now we are connected, so it's wonderful to have your company. Please do leave the comments in there if there's anything that's not right out there. Well, right now it's looking at Brisbane today. Looks like there might be a chance of rain by the looks of it, but not right at this point in time. So moving on, let's get on with some of the news for today. First of all, Dr. Norman Swan, he dispels some of the myths about the COVID.
You'd think we should be able to relax after Omicron peaks. Soon, well over 90% of Australians above the age of 12 will be vaccinated. Many will have had boosters. Kids are being immunised. And it's estimated that millions of us will have been infected with Omicron. Professor Eddie Holmes helped to map the coronavirus genome and probably knows as much about the evolution of the virus as anyone on the planet.
The critical thing now is that we're in a period where we are getting these new variants come on a fairly regular basis. And so far, what's been very obvious is that these variants have come often from places with very poor vaccination levels.
At the moment, in those lower-income countries, we've got a capacity to have delivered about 200 million doses of vaccine a month. But of course, that's variable across individual countries. We need to actually have about 300 million doses a month administered if we're to hit that 70% target of people vaccinated.
And some of the lowest levels of COVID immunisation are in Africa, where Omicron was first detected. There are African countries with as few as 1% of their population vaccinated, when the World Health Organization target is 70%.
There are several factors that account for this low coverage of vaccination in Africa. First of all, Africa do not produce vaccines. That is just clear that as a continent, only 1% of the vaccines that they need are produced on the continent. So it tends to import 99% of vaccines. Second is that the mechanism that were set up, put in place, was challenged in terms of delivering vaccines in a timely fashion when the vaccines were available, essentially because vaccines that were available were actually bought by the more developed countries.
The result of the low vaccination rate is that populations where the coronavirus is circulating freely and mutating gives rise to variants. There are quite a few misconceptions about the evolution of the coronavirus. The first myth is that one variant leads to the next, when in fact it's not a direct process.
Omicron, we know, did not come from Delta. So if you do an evolution, like a family tree, an evolutionary tree, they are separate. And similarly, Delta did not come from Alpha, okay? So it's not a simple progression at all.
That matters because you can't predict the next variant from Omicron. We can still be surprised in the months ahead. So the next variant can pop up anywhere, which leads to the second misconception, which is that variants become less virulent or milder as time goes by.
Omicron certainly appears to be less virulent than Delta, but it also appears to be perhaps worse than the original Wuhan strain. What evolutionary theory tells us is that virulence, how severe the disease is, is a very complicated characteristic. It could in time go down, could stay the same, or it could go up.
And that brings us to the third and potentially most dangerous misconception of all, because it could lull us into a false sense of security. It revolves around the notion of living with COVID.
The frequent but not the inevitable course of a virus is that they become more infectious but less severe, and that's clearly what's happened with the Omicron variant. Now, we'll move on all the advice we have from being a pandemic to what's called an endemic disease, where it becomes a less severe but embedded condition in the same way that the flu has.
The word endemic is much misunderstood. Many believe that when the coronavirus becomes endemic, we can relax, but that's not necessarily so.
When people talk about endemic, what I think I mean is that the transmission is somewhere globally. It's always there. It may not be in any country at any one time, but globally it's there. That does not mean that, very importantly, the virus is mild or harmless at that time.
For the next variant to dominate, it will have to be more contagious than Omicron, which means it will probably be better able to evade previous immunity. But it's impossible to predict its severity, its virulence.
I think it is in all of our interest, and that this is an important point I want to make, that we strive to vaccinate at speed and at scale across the world, so that we should restrict the ability for the virus to transmit. The common goal for all of us should be to vaccinate quickly so that we create a barrier for the virus to circulate across the world.
One of the questions I keep on being asked is, when and how will this end? Well, we can't even begin to think about that until the world is vaccinated and the virus slowed down.
Australia needs to step up along with every other high-income country and every other country that actually has capacity in this area in order to actually get those vaccination targets realised by the middle, we hope, of this year, so we can bring down the risk of more variants and bring this pandemic to a close.
We work collectively to scale up testing. We work collectively to scale up vaccination and, of course, the treatment programs. If we do those three things, then we have the right to be optimistic that we'll begin to turn the corner in 2022. We will not eradicate the virus in 2022, but we can truly turn a corner in 2022.
So turning the corner, well, hopefully that we do turn that corner, as people have been worried and very wary as well. Doctors are in short supply and demand, and they are working long hours as well to trying to cope up with the situation.
3 weeks ago, 75-year-old Dr. John Chung was happily retired, but now he's had to return to work at his old clinic because they can't find a doctor to replace him.
It's been difficult. Got to get doctors to work. They go to somewhere where there's more money.
Total Care Medical Clinic in Melbourne's southeast used to have 8 doctors on staff. Now there's just one full-time GP for almost 6,000 patients, and if they can't recruit any more doctors, they'll have to close. Pensioners Alan and Noel Freestone have been visiting Total Care Medical Clinic for 12 years. Noel is recovering from a severe stroke, and the dwindling availability of doctors has them concerned.
Without a clinic like this, the area will be so much poorer. I will be poorer, my wife will be poorer.
Clinics say that doctors would rather work in the inner city where they can charge more money, rather than bulk billing clinics in lower socio-economic areas. And the blame is being placed on funding shortfalls, government regulations and zoning rules for outer metropolitan suburbs.
They're creating a much bigger problem in outer metro in an effort to try to fix the rural health strategies, which is quite unfair that it's us that are suffering.
A 2019 Deloitte report on GP shortages found that there's already a shortfall in GPs working in metropolitan areas. That's expected to grow to a shortage of nearly 10,000 doctors by 2030. And it's forecast to hit hardest in the high-growth areas of the outer metro suburbs. A Senate inquiry has been launched to look into the issue, with submissions pouring in from around the country. The findings are meant to be handed down later this year, but clinics say they're running out of time. The Royal Australian College of General Practitioners has called on the Commonwealth Government to better invest in GPs ahead of the upcoming federal election.
We want longer consults rewarded at the same value as shorter consults. We're trained to a high standard in Australia, and we'd like to be able to use those skills to help the health system and save our hospital care for those who really need it.
The government needs to stand up and be accounted for. I think they need to support clinics like mine to stop them from going down.
Until then, Dr. Chung will continue to look after his patients for as long as he can. Jordan Fennell.
And of course, that is a wonderful thing that he could come back and do that in the interest of our community and in the interest of all the patients. Well, of course, that's what's happening. And many times, all the staff, even not only doctors, anyone that moves in where they get better pay, better working conditions, in a city and things like that, and they leave the suburbs. So, the suburban areas are then just left to their own accord, which is just not good. Well, of course, this next story is about a young man with disability who passed away even after recovering from COVID.
Happy birthday to you.
Joyful with an intense love to share. That's how his grieving parents want Lachlan Moore to be remembered.
He was loving, fun. He loved people.
Lachlan had a rare neurodevelopmental genetic condition called Angelman syndrome, epilepsy and cerebral palsy. He died at home earlier this month. A coroner found he'd suffered a brain bleed. Just 28 years old, he is the youngest person in Queensland to have died with COVID.
We never considered that we would outlive Lachlan. We
planned our life around him surviving us.
Yeah.
His family has lodged a formal complaint with Redcliffe Hospital alleging negligent care in the hours leading up to his death.
Whether they'd been able to do anything in time, we'll never know. But he would have had a hell of a lot more chance than he did here.
Lachlan became ill with a bad cough, high temperature and began having seizures. He was taken to Redcliffe Hospital by ambulance, where paramedics advised staff he was a possible COVID case. His mother says Lachlan, who was double vaxxed, was taken to an isolation room but refused a rapid antigen test.
Why? Even if they'd said to me, it's going to cost you $10, it's going to cost you $200, we would have paid for it because we needed to know. And he was non-verbal. He couldn't tell us how he felt. We had to guess how he was feeling.
Instead, he was given a PCR COVID test.
The doctor came and said that they could only find an upper respiratory infection.
And discharged with antibiotics.
If I thought he had COVID, I wouldn't have brought him home.
That night, Lachlan died in his sleep.
My little man, and I couldn't do anything. I've kept him safe while we drive for 28 years.
The following night, they received a text message to say he'd tested positive.
Angry, just livid.
Shocked.
Lachlan is among 52 deaths recorded so far and one of 5 who died at home. Queensland Health has been contacted for comment, while the Health Minister offered her sympathies and condolences to the family.
And just to be a statistic is really hard, but at least he's now a part of the statistics, and hopefully someone will look at it and think about how do we treat people with complex needs with possible COVID.
Kate McKenna, ABC News, Brisbane.
And that is a little bit too close to home, Redcliffe Hospital, and of course, looking at the story, the health department is also under a lot of pressure as well, because there's so many people understaffed, and of course, the proper training and everything. Of course, everything contributes to that. Well, now they're talking about reducing the quarantine days from maybe 7 to 5. Do you think it's a good idea?
The indications on the infections, so the start of this process of understanding what's happening with that infection number in the community, is looking promising. We are seeing a levelling out, particularly in ACT, New South Wales and Victoria, and hopefully in Queensland as well, where if we've reached the peak, we're still seeing high numbers, but obviously, we want to come off that exponential climb which we've seen in previous weeks, and we look like that's happened, and in fact they are really starting to be convincingly levelling out, whichever metrics you look at. Of course, hospitalisations are a concern, and often it's, we look to those community numbers to understand what's going to happen in hospitals. But in fact, we've got a delay on our community numbers. Even with our rapid antigen tests, we've got the majority of them in the previous week, not just yesterday's rapid antigen tests. So in fact, they're probably more in sync, which gives us hope that if we're starting to see that levelling out really establish in our case numbers, that should be mirrored in our hospital numbers in the very near future. And of course, that's critical for deaths. That's where we're going to see the people who can't survive the infection being counted, and that does have another extra delay of a couple of weeks.
Given how difficult it is for so many people still to get rapid antigen tests, how much can we actually trust those infection numbers, though? How representative are they really?
We've seen right throughout this wave, with these incredible high numbers, a glimpse of what's happening in the community. Some people are testing regularly, some people have a supply of rapid antigen tests they can use now, others don't. So we know it's not a complete capture of all cases, and we also know that the people that choose to test, let alone report the result on rapid antigen, are a skewed view of what's happening in the community as well. But if we're looking at the overall picture, the Health Department in New South Wales was reporting yesterday, they look at things like absenteeism from work, for example, and all the metrics they look at along with the testing are telling a similar picture. The problem really is with the hospitals that we've also, while we've still got high numbers and high exposure in the community, we're losing staff, as we know, both through social and home exposures as well as work. But also we do have this unknown proportion of those hospital cases who are representing that high rate in the community, because whatever they go to hospital with, if they have the virus as well, they've got to be managed differently. So we're looking at a different story when it comes to case numbers and hospitalisations than any previous wave. Even counting in those rapid antigen tests, it's really hard to have a very firm picture. So we're not talking about ref numbers and so on in the way we have before, because it's too much else driving those numbers. But it's still across all sectors, across all LGAs. When you drill down on the PCR numbers, hopefully we are seeing enough indicators across all of those to say this has not only slowed, that we're looking at a plateau in those places where the outbreaks really started, particularly in New South Wales.
I'm just keen to get your perspective on two important comments from politicians over the last 24 hours. So we'll just go through them quickly because there's a lot to get through. Firstly, Josh Frydenberg yesterday hinted that the government might be considering cutting isolation time down to 5 days for people who have COVID. He said he noted that other countries have cut it to 5 days. Is that a good idea?
Well, the US certainly have done that, and of course we know UK is talking about possibly not having it. The thing is that by the time most people realise that they have the infection, and it tends to be a shorter infection with Omicron, particularly if you're vaccinated, it might mean that 5 days is actually more than adequate. And that's going to cover most people for their infectious period, and the ones that aren't will have a low level of infectiousness. It'd be really good to have some studies done to actually show us when people do stop testing positive on the rat, so that they're less likely to be infectious to back that up. So we might hear more about the data in Australia if that decision comes in. Low risk, though. It will not be day 5 of infection. It'll be day 5 since test. And for most people, that's day 10 or more.
OK, well, speaking of rapid antigen tests, New South Wales and Victoria are considering recommending 2 rapid antigen tests for students and teachers when they go back to school as sort of a sentinel testing. How much protection would that give? How much help would that be at stopping spread of COVID in schools?
Well, the idea of that is that it's just puts your fingers out on the school community in an active way. You're not waiting for someone to have symptoms or know you've had an infection in a classroom. So that's really the forecasting. If you're going to have a problem, it's that early warning. So it is sensible to do that. Every test isn't perfect. You might get the odd false positive, so they will assess this. But while your community infection rates are high, it's definitely worth doing. But they'll also follow up any positive case in classroom and then test to stay, to make sure that kids can keep coming to school, but to monitor them more closely if they know they've had an exposure in school.
Well, of course, we know that with the testing is not going to stop the pandemic from spreading. The testing is just going to find out whether you've got it or whether, it will stop the spread because if you've got it. But one of the things with because the testing is not the cure, it is just a test. To see whether or not you've got it. The vaccine is the key. So you need to get your vaccine, you need to get vaccinated, you need to get your boosters as well, as I did on Monday. So double vaccinated and a booster as well. Well, right now, before we go to our interview and then the Daily India Report, let's go to Tonga and have a look at the developing story there on that volcano.
From the air, it's becoming clear just how widespread the damage is across the tiny island of Tonga. These before and after satellite images show villages coated in volcanic ash and the water severely polluted.
There's a huge clean-up operation underway. The town has been blanketed in this thick film of volcanic dust.
There are grave fears many Tongans may not have survived the huge volcanic eruption and tsunami on Saturday. The first confirmed casualty is British woman Angela Glover. She moved to Tonga in 2015 to open an animal shelter. She died trying to rescue her dogs.
Little hope. So much better.
Her husband managed to survive by clinging to a tree. He contacted Angela's family in the UK using a satellite phone supplied by the British Embassy.
I haven't got the words in my vocabulary to even describe how we're feeling at the moment. This is just a terrible shock.
For many Tongans in Australia, there's still no word yet of their loved ones back home.
It's very, very difficult because I don't know what's going on with my family. Where are they? Are they all right?
Mela Loahi Lanoa is one of the lucky ones. After 2 sleepless nights unable to reach her Tongan family, yesterday her nephew messaged her using a satellite connection.
He said, "Don't worry, we are okay." I feel happy and relieved and praise to God.
Communication issues caused by the eruption have not only made it difficult to reach family and friends, but also getting help to Tonga. A major underwater telecommunications cable was damaged during the tsunami, and it's expected to take at least 2 weeks for it to be repaired.
One of our cables is pretty much close to where the eruptions were, so that will take us some time to get some clearance for the vessel to be around the volcanic zone.
In the meantime, Australia is offering help. Loaded with crucial supplies, HMAS Adelaide has left Sydney bound for Tonga. Lydia Feng, ABC News.
So it was wonderful to see that Australia and New Zealand are on top of things and trying to get the help and aids out there as soon as they can in a safe manner as well. Well, right here, all we know that still carrying on from that news is that people are still waiting, and many families have still not been able to get in touch with the loved ones back home.
From a suburban house in Brisbane, members of the Tongan diaspora share their prayers on community radio and TV.
People were crying, there's been a lot of high emotions. We got some church leaders online to offer words of encouragement.
We just want people out there to share, to share their agony and their grief.
Mele Nawamo is anxiously waiting for news from her brother and 2 sisters.
Who knows, they might be okay, but as far as I'm concerned of not hearing anything, it's so worrying, devastating.
The 1 in 1,000-year volcanic eruption has raised many disturbing questions, with so few answers.
For local people, most of them won't really know what to expect next. I think even experts can't ever be sure what to expect next.
What little we do know is that the eruption has sent a series of tsunamis across the vast Pacific Ocean, with at least 3 fatalities. And the people who live in the Tongan capital, Nuku'alofa, just 65 kilometres away from the volcano, are having to contend with layers of potentially dangerous volcanic ash.
Nuku'alofa is a coastal city. It's right there on the coast. The Royal Palace would be at the very forefront of the tsunami wave, along with a lot of the banks, hotels and some of the major infrastructure.
We have all seen photographs and videos even just shared in social media. They do seem to show enough ash on roofs and on the ground to be potentially a problem, at least for transport, even if not for water and sewage.
Although these satellite images show the Tongan capital before and after the eruption, we still don't know just how dangerous this ash is to human health.
Some fallout from volcanic eruptions can be slightly acidic, and that can affect the chemistry of the water that people drink or other uses. We have lots of uses for water. Sometimes the acidic fallout from volcanic eruptions can even affect vegetation, as in agriculture and various animals.
And efforts to help the people of Tonga are being severely hampered by a breakdown in nearly all communications to the Pacific nation. That's because the eruption cut a critical underwater cable, the 875-kilometre optic fibre that links Tonga to the Pacific network and the rest of the world.
As our world becomes more technologically advanced in the future, we're going to have conversations about how we protect this critical infrastructure that we all rely on every single day. I think it's a fundamental human need to want to know that your family and friends are safe and well after a disaster's occurred, and the fact that Tongans as expats living overseas can't get in touch with their families, I can only begin to imagine how frightening and overwhelming that must be.
The last time.
And right now we leave that report there, as we know that everyone's trying very hard to get to that satellite phone and satellite signals to try and get the connected with their families in the way that they can. Well, in the future, maybe rather than the cables, the orbital satellites and the signals and the transmitters will be in the sky. Of course, we know things are going that way. Right now, it's time to go to our daily, not the daily report, but we have a very special interview today, and it is quite a wonderful interview looking at some of the good things, some of the better things that are happening out there in the community. So Commonwealth Bank donates about 500k to rural aid to provide additional mental health support to Australian farmers. Rural Aid has announced 500 donation to Commonwealth Bank to expand their network of experienced counsellors based in rural towns across the country. It has been a challenging couple of years for Australian farmers who have faced bushfires, droughts and floods, impacting them not just physically or financially, but emotionally and mentally as well. The rural charity provides critical and coincidental support to farmers through help, well-being, fodder assistance, including a free counselling service and community-based interactions, which is quite a good project. The new donation sees an appointment of 10 additional counsellors to the New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, and allowing Rural Aid to reach locations of the service. These appointments will help the increased demand in mental health and well-being services, which is being provided to the rural areas. The donation brings Commonwealth Bank's contribution to mental health services during the pandemic to a staggering $1 million following a donation announcement with Lifeline. Well, today we'll be joined by, we'll be trying to make that connection right now, is John Walters, of the CEO of Rural Aid. John was appointed as Chief Executive Officer of Rural Aid in February 2020, having previously led Fairfax Media's national agriculture business and being integral part of the transformation and the modernization of its regional media assets in Queensland, Northern Territory, and of course Northern New South Wales. Previously, John was the editor and the General Manager of iconic agricultural masthead Queensland Country Life, and we can remember that publication. Throughout his media career, John always championed the bush and agitated for a fair go for primary producers and their families. He has deep connections across the Australian business sector and a genuine affinity in rural and regional communities. Yep, do we have the connection? Well, there we are. So thank you very much for joining us, John. Good to see another media personality, and of course what you are doing out there in the community. That is just wonderful. So what has the demand for mental health and well-being services for farmers been during this time, John?
Oh, in a single word, challenging. Drought, bushfire, flood and COVID all combined have absolutely tested our farming families like never before. We've seen a real increase in demand for mental health and wellbeing services in our rural communities in the wake of these combined disasters. And it's also that other really critical factor, the known gaps that exist in rural healthcare provision in recent years. So Rural Aid has been very active in seeking to provide that support that's required.
So Rural Aid is doing such a wonderful job and providing, bridging that gap as you have just mentioned. So, how does Rural Aid actually do this? How do you support the Aussie farmers?
The support we receive from our fantastic partners like Commonwealth Bank means we're able to provide critical and confidential support to our farmers.
Yep.
And particularly from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, with financial assistance. And then when we get down to really practical stuff like fodder and drinking water, Rural Aid offers a free counselling and community-based service. Our programs help create more sustainable communities by building capacity, and that leads to stronger futures for all of our farmers in the country.
And of course it does. It is a wonderful thing that you are doing out there. And of course, to do what you are doing, a lot of resources are required as well. So why is this funding so crucial?
If we didn't have the support of generous sponsors and supporters, we wouldn't be able to provide as many life-changing services for our Aussie farmers. Last year, for example, Rural Aid supported 1,000 families when the mouse plague was at its worst. We helped 350 farmers with financial support post-floods on the New South Wales mid-north coast. We delivered 100 water tanks and we filled those tanks with millions of litres of drinking water. None of that would be possible if it wasn't for the support that we receive from our supporters like Commonwealth Bank.
Well, it is, of course, that support is needed, but of course with the support, it enables you to do what you do. So, both the support is needed and people like you who actually on the ground doing the work that you do is also very crucial as well. So, with this funding that's been used, how are you going to use the funds? How is this funding going to be used?
The $500,000 donation from the Commonwealth Bank will allow us to make those appointment of these counsellors and have our counsellors really active in New South Wales, into Victoria, South Australia and WA, and allowing us to have more conversations with more farmers and their families more often. And that's where the real need is. There's an undeniable need for having on-ground support in communities, and the support we've received here is really going to allow us to continue to do that life-saving work.
And the life-saving work that you do, Dave, John, is just amazing. So yes, that funding will go a long way in helping all that. So, of course, there will be people listening, and all the rural community. So where can they go to get support or find out more about, the counselling services that you and Rural Aid provide?
More support is always welcome, and we know people are so generous towards our farming community. And to find out a little bit more, you go to ruralaid.org.au, or you can give us a call on 1300 327 624.
Once again, John, thank you so much for coming on the show, and it's just been wonderful having you on the show. When we look at all the things that you are doing, this is just amazing. And of course, what is more amazing is that the help and the support that has been given by the Commonwealth Bank. And if it wasn't for generous support of sponsors and donors like that, we would not be able to see programs such as this. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi told the World Economic Forum that India is taking long strides towards self-reliance by implementing Make in India, Make for World. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on January 17 addressed the World Economic Forum Davos Agenda Summit virtually. He spoke on the state of the world, saying that India will continue with its reforms to enable its vision of sustainable economic growth. Modi highlighted his country's self-reliance agenda, strengthened by Make in India, Make for the World. He invited the world to invest in India, calling it the best time. He detailed various steps taken to make India the most attractive investment destination in the world. The PM said Indian youth have an entrepreneurial spirit and an eagerness to innovate and adopt new technology and will take businesses and ideas to new heights. With India's global skills, India had registered more than 60,000 startups in 2021, Modi announced. The Prime Minister highlighted India's innovations in technology and digital infrastructure, rapid adaptation of technologies like the Unified Payments Interface, technological solutions like Arogya Setu and CoWIN, besides tax reforms to strengthen ease of doing business in the country. Speaking of a long-term sustainable vision of the future of economic growth, Modi said Indian policies taking decisions regarding the present as well as the goals of the next 25 years. He assured the growth would be green, clean, sustainable and reliable. He stressed while pointing out India's commitment to climate change. Modi said more than 600,000 villages have been connected with optical fiber. The WEF has said Davos Agenda 2022 will be the first global platform for key world leaders to share their visions for 2022, and it is being convened on the theme of the state of the world. Some good news as India battles a nationwide surge in the coronavirus disease driven by the highly transmissible Omicron variant. India's first mRNA vaccine will soon begin human trials. India is set to start human trials on its first homegrown COVID vaccine based on messenger RNA technology. Pune-based Genova Biopharmaceuticals is making India's first mRNA vaccine known as HGC019 in collaboration with US-based HDT Biocorp. In August, the Drug Controller General of India had approved the Phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. The company will start testing the vaccine on humans for efficacy and immunogenicity from next month. The mRNA vaccine is also reportedly effective against the new Omicron variant. mRNA vaccines carry the molecular information to make the protein in the host using the synthetic RNA of the virus. The host body produces the viral protein that is recognized by the immune system, thereby enabling the body to fight against the disease. Vaccines are considered safe as mRNA is non-infectious, non-integrating in nature, and degraded by standard cellular mechanisms. India's 2022 Republic Day parade at the Rajpath will see the grandest and largest flypast ever with the participation of 75 aircrafts. The grandest and largest flypast ever on 26 January 2022 will see a total of 75 aircraft from the Air Force, Army and Navy mark the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav celebrations. The flypast will conclude with 7 Jaguar fighter aircraft flying in the Amrit formation to commemorate the 75 years of independence. This flypast will also include Tangale formation, which will have 1 Dakota and 2 Donair flying in Vic formation. This is a tribute to the Tangale airdrop operations of the 1971 war. There will also be Meghna formation of 1 Chinook and 4 Mi-17s. The flypast will begin with Dhwaj formation with 4 Mi-17 aircraft, followed by Rudra and Rahat formations with 4 and 5 advanced light helicopters, respectively. The Trinamool Congress party, led by West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee, has made a formal offer to the Congress for an alliance ahead of the assembly elections in the state of Goa. Didi, as Mamata is popularly known, is not letting up on forging a front against the BJP of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Her party TMC has made a formal offer to the Congress for an alliance ahead of the Goa Assembly. But Congress is yet to respond, confirms TMC MP and Goa in charge Mahua Moitra. Meanwhile, a senior Congress election observer from Goa, Chidambaram, said that the Congress was open to receiving support from other parties wishing to defeat the BJP, provided they recognize the Congress is best placed to lead any such anti-BJP alliance in Goa. Goa goes to polls on February 14 along with Punjab and Uttarakhand in a single phase, while the election results will be declared on March 10th. The Election Commission of India has postponed the Punjab Assembly elections and voting will now be held on February 20th instead of 14th as originally scheduled. Several political parties had urged the Election Commission to postpone the polls in view of Ravidas Jayanti on February 16th. The political parties said that hundreds of thousands of followers of Guru Ravidas will travel to Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh to celebrate the day. Therefore, they urged the EC to defer the polls for a few days after Ravidas Jayanti. There is no change so far in the election schedules of the rest of the states. Punjab will vote in a single phase only and the results of all the 5 elections will still be announced on March 10th. Punjab elections will be a four-cornered fight with the BJP and Amrinder Singh duo along with SAD and the AAP looking to dislodge the incumbent Congress government. India recently celebrated Innovation Week 2022 virtually and highlighted India's key startups and entrepreneurs. One successful startup was also featured at the virtual Youth Pravasi Bharatiya Divas conference on 9th January 2022. Here is a special report on Coupos.com.
This year we have taken up a new challenge. So we are building a payment solution for the complete LATAM market, which is dedicated toward transportation and logistics vertical. When we are combining all the transportation providers and some of the key logistics providers, including Mercedes-Benz, DHL, and some other companies who are looking into our solutions and trying to position Coupos Pay, what we call it, as a unique and leading solution for this travel, logistics, and tourism market in LATAM.
In a landmark judgment, Supreme Court has rejected a Mauritius company's petition against the order of the National Company Law Tribunal and the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. The Supreme Court has dismissed an appeal filed by Divas Multimedia against the decision of the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. The NCLAT had upheld the National Company Law Tribunal's decision to wind up the company. The decision is bound to have significant political and economic ramifications, as it is likely India will use this judgment while fighting against an international arbitration award won by Devas, whose enforcement the company has been pushing for in some geographies. Recently, a Canadian court ordered the attachments of assets owned in the country by Air India as part of this. The judgment, delivered by a bench comprising Justices Hemant Gupta and V. Ramasubramaniam, dismissed Devas and its minority shareholder Devas Employees Mauritius Private Limited's appeal. The bench upheld the order passed by NCLAT that stated that Devas was incorporated with a fraudulent motive to collude and connive with some officials of Entrix Corporation, the commercial arm of Indian Space Research Organization. The judgment is the latest chapter in a controversial deal during the previous UPA regime when in 2005 Devas entered into an agreement with Entrix, the private sector arm of ISRO, to provide high-speed data services using S-band satellite spectrum from Entrix. Kathak's legendary exponent Pandit Birju Maharaj passed away on 17th January at the age of 83. He leaves behind an unparalleled legacy of performing arts. Padma Vibhushan Pandit Birju Maharaj had been suffering from a kidney ailment and was under dialysis treatment. He passed away surrounded by his family and disciples. The maestro was fondly known as Maharaj Ji. As the news of his death spread, netizens flooded the internet with tributes to the Kathak legend. Prime Minister Narendra Modi shared a tweet of condolence saying that his death was an irreplaceable loss to the entire art world. Pandit Birju Maharaj was born in the house of Kathak exponent Jagannath Maharaj, popularly known as Achan Maharaj of Lucknow Gharana, who served as a court dancer in Raigad princely state. Birju was trained by his uncles Lachu Maharaj and Shambhu Maharaj and his father. Bollywood's super-duper action director Rohit Shetty has shared the teaser of his upcoming OTT show Mission Frontline. The show will stream on Discovery Plus on 20th January. After delivering the blockbuster cop drama Suryavanshi, Rohit Shetty is now gearing up for his OTT debut with the show Mission Frontline. The Discovery Plus show will see the ace director spend an entire day with J&K Police's Special Operations Group, promising a raw and real insight into the lives of armed forces stationed at the borders. Rohit will be stepping into the shoes of Special Operations Group soldier and getting a first-hand experience of how the unit resides and undergoes intense training amid the difficult and dangerous terrains. Ahead of its release, Shetty shared a teaser from the episode of his as he undergoes myriad hardships to understand what it takes to safeguard the sovereignty of the nation. Directed by Kunal Kochar, the show will be available to stream on Discovery Plus from January 20th. That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
And thank you very much, Himanshu, for that report. And of course, team from Delhi, Kayan Gupta ji, Manish Gupta, and Anil, and everyone from the Delhi team. Well done. Well, right now, it's time to say goodbye, but don't forget that at 10 a.m. we will be back with the weekly GlobeNet Realty's Real Estate Update. So, Real Estate Update with Ushi Chandra coming up right next at 10 a.m. We'll see you all then.